Picture this. The home you've been saving for just got $50,000 more expensive, and it's not because of the market. It's because of taxes and tariffs. The question is, how did we get here? And more importantly, what does it mean for Toronto's real estate in 2025? So welcome to Under the Radar Real Estate, where we uncover what's really going on in Toronto. Today, we're diving into how tariffs, tax hikes, and political uncertainty could reshape the housing market in 2025, and not in the way most people expect. So, if you're wondering whether it's getting easier or harder to buy a home in this city, stick around because the answer is, well, complicated. So let's kick things off with some breaking news south of the border. US President Donald Trump, yes, he's back, is once again shaking up global trade with his America First policy. Trump has announced that steep 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports, including key building materials like lumber, aluminum, and steel, could go into effect as soon as February 1st. Trump cited issues like trade imbalances and even fentanyl crossing borders as reasons for these tariffs. But let's be real, this isn't just a political talking point. It's a direct hit to the construction industry. Developers rely on these materials to build everything from downtown condo towers to laneway homes. And if those costs go up, you guessed it, those costs get passed directly on to you, the buyer. But this isn't just about higher costs for materials. These tariffs could trigger a ripple effect across the entire housing market. Here's what's even more alarming. Scotiabank is already warning that the Bank of Canada might be forced to hike interest rates by as much as 300 basis points to manage the inflationary fallout from these tariffs. That's a 3% increase in lending rates on top of everything we've already dealt with over the past few years. So think about what that means for home buyers and sellers. Over the past 6 months, we've finally seen mortgage rates drop below 5% after years of relentless increases. But now the possibility of rates climbing back above 5% is unwelcome news for first-time buyers already struggling to make this work. And it doesn't stop there. Higher rates could discourage existing homeowners from moving, since they'll want to hold on to their lower rates for as long as possible. So combine that with fewer new homes being built because of skyrocketing material costs, and you can see where this is heading. Inventory becomes even more constrained, and when inventory tightens, prices either stagnate or rise. Fewer homes, higher costs, and buyers pushed out of the market. It's a perfect storm that can lead to a market that's unaffordable for most and unsustainable for the rest. Now, back on home soil, the news doesn't get any better for homeowners or for even future homeowners. Toronto's Mayor Olivia Chow has made headlines with her 2025 budget proposal, a 6.9% property tax hike. For the average homeowner, that's about $210 more a year, and while this isn't exactly unexpected, it's sparking plenty of debate. Now, here's where I might ruffle some feathers, especially with my colleagues in the real estate. I'm not entirely against property tax increases. But before you come at me in the comments, let me explain. Property taxes are, by nature, a recurring expense. Yes, they add to the cost of homeownership, but they're spread out over time. And honestly, like everything else in our lives, the costs of running a city have gone up. So I get it. The city needs predictable income streams to make sure that we still have proper access to transit, garbage collection, emergency services, and everything else that keeps Toronto livable. But here's the thing. Property tax increases should only come, in my opinion, at the expense of eliminating the land transfer tax. Let's be real. The land transfer tax is one of the biggest barriers for first-time homebuyers. It's the reason so many people look at their savings and think, no way I could afford this. If you want to increase property taxes, fine. But in my opinion, the land transfer tax should be off the table. It's outdated and it's punitive. So now let's address the elephant in the room. A lot of the people who use Toronto services don't actually live in Toronto. Take a look at the highways or commuter trains in the morning. What do you see? Cars pouring in from Mississauga, Brampton, Vaughan, Durham, you name it. These folks are using our roads, public transit systems, and our infrastructure, but they're not paying into the pot to maintain any of it. So maybe it's time to take a page from New York City and implement congestion pricing, road tolls. It's not just about raising money, it's about fairness. If you're using Toronto's resources daily, you should contribute to their upkeep. And guess what? This could take some of the financial burden off Toronto homeowners who are already stretched super thin. Now, to her credit, Chow's budget is channeling these new tax revenues into areas that matter: transit, public safety, and community programs. And hey, if those investments actually improve livability in the city, I'm all for it. Toronto deserves better transit, safer streets, and stronger communities, but we've got to balance this with policies that make entering the market realistic for buyers, especially young families. Now, if tariffs and tax hikes weren't enough, 2025 is also shaping up to be a year of political uncertainty. Both federally and provincially, we'll see elections that could reshape housing policy. On paper, that sounds promising. After all, housing is one of the biggest points of emphasis for both levels of government. But here's the reality. For Toronto, it's not so simple. At the federal and provincial levels, Toronto isn't always an electable topic. Let's face it. There's a lot of anti-Toronto sentiment across the country. To many voters outside the GTA, Toronto is seen as a big city that gets all the attention, all the funding, all the perks. It's that center of the universe stereotype, and it creates a huge barrier for any meaningful Toronto-specific housing policies to gain traction. And this isn't just conjecture. When policies are drafted at the provincial or federal level, they're often designed to appeal to broader electorates, places where Toronto's unique challenges don't always resonate. Housing affordability in Moose Jaw or Moncton looks very different from what we're dealing with here in Toronto. That's why we, as Torontonians, need to make sure that any policy enacted at those levels actually benefits our city. So how do we make sure Toronto's voice is heard? First, we need to approach this with cautious optimism. Sure, it's great to hear housing at the top of the agenda during an election year, but we can't just assume that what's promised on the campaign trail will translate into solutions for Toronto's unique housing market. Second, we need to demand transparency and accountability. If federal or provincial governments introduce programs or funding for housing, we need to ask, how does this benefit Toronto specifically? Are these policies designed to address the complexity of our market, or are they one-size-fits-all solutions that miss the mark? And let's not forget, Toronto generates a significant portion of this country's GDP. Policies that support Toronto's housing market aren't just about helping our city, they're about supporting the economic engine of Canada. If Toronto thrives, the country thrives. Now look, I'm not here to tell you which party to vote for, or which candidate has the best housing plan. What I'm saying is this: as Torontonians, we can't afford to sit back and hope the province or Ottawa gets it right. We need to be vocal, we need to be engaged, and we need to ensure that the policies coming out of these elections actually address our city's challenges. I want to hear from you. What's your take on these issues? Are property tax hikes the right move? Should Toronto explore congestion pricing or road tolls? And what do you think the federal and provincial governments should be doing to tackle housing affordability? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your voice matters in this conversation. Because at the end of the day, Toronto isn't just a city. It's home to millions of people who deserve housing policies that work for them, not against them.